Hi, my name is Rob Israch. I'm president of Tipalti, a finance automation company, and I'm joining you today to talk about running a company at scale and the fun ups and downs and pitfalls of that experience.
Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Kauke. Today, my guest is Rob Israch. Rob is the president of Tipalti. Tipalti is a late-stage, fast-growth SaaS company in the finance sector. And today we're going to be exploring the joys and ups and downs and trials and tribulations of building a fast-scale business that's international. We're also going to look at how context matters, because obviously this is 2025 and there's been a lot of change over the last couple of years. So we're going to be looking at how you have to adapt, what it looks like to build a team, and how the business evolves through different phases, and what those different phases mean in terms of leadership. So, Rob, without any further ado, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Marcus.
It's a pleasure. So, Rob, let's start with 60 seconds on your history. How did you get here?
Yeah, 60 seconds. So I'm a marketer by background. Ever since I was in university, I knew from a year or two in that I'd be a marketer. I would obsess about billboards and language and design and messaging, and no one else that I talked to about it seemed to care. And that indicated that something I enjoyed. I'm creative and analytical, and it's one of the few fields that combine the two. And of course, over my course time, while I joined Tipalti, I was at NetSuite beforehand, Intuit, who does QuickBooks and TurboTax, that some companies, at least in the States, would be familiar with, and General Electric before that. But my path was always marketing until Tipalti. I joined as a CMO, and then a few years in, we wanted to get an alliance channel off the ground. And I obviously know quite a lot about the ERP and the finance technology landscape, and I volunteered to take it on. And so I ran marketing and alliances together for many years. And then about 5 years ago, I was tapped by my CEO to move out to London to launch our Europe business. And now we've got pretty built out offices in both London and Amsterdam. And, we have licenses for all of Europe, EU and UK. And so that was an amazing experience out there for about 3 years. And then I was tapped to take on the president role. And I essentially run the whole buyer journey, customer journey, growth for the business. So that's sales, marketing, and the customer operations organization.
Okay, so being without wanting to offend, you're a bit of a freak, because marketers ending up in that kind of leadership role are rare. So I'd love to start with that. What is it that you did that most marketers don't do that got you into position of president?
Honestly, I think it's pretty simple. Like if you get results, and you go into gray space, when you go to a particular big company, people who have been at startups know that to be a successful startup, you have to naturally go into gray space. You wear multiple hats, you do things outside of your job scope, you learn things you had no idea how to learn before. And a lot of professionals just don't go into gray space. Actually, it was what told me I need to get out of big companies, because people don't tend to do gray space in big companies. And I had a few of those experiences when I was at Intuit, which I find frustrating, because I think the gray space is where the growth is, both personally, professionally, as well as for businesses. And if you have a culture of people not going to gray space, you have the beginning of a dying company, in my opinion. And then you have to get results. So if you raise your hand, and if I would have raised my hand, take on alliances, and it was a complete failure, I doubt that I would have been tapped to go to Europe and launch that business. But you have to be willing to take on challenges beyond your knowledge and skill set, willing to be humble and listen to people, and take on their advice who know better than you. And then you have to get results. Like you have to execute, not just make things in PowerPoint pages and talk with big intellectual words, but you have to make it happen. And some people are good at the 50,000 or even 20,000 foot level, but they actually cannot either do it themselves or get people on their team to get results. And then sometimes that means doing unsexy things and digging into details you don't feel like digging into, but doing whatever it takes essentially to get the outcome that the business needs, however it needs to be done. So I think those are kind of where the key factors.
About 15 years ago, the CMO had a chance to take on the role of CEO, but they blew it. And I think to a large extent, they blew it because they didn't speak the language of the board and finance. What advice would you give to CMOs in order to be able to establish themselves as a viable candidate for those top leadership roles?
Yeah, so you definitely have to be analytical. I'm pretty analytical. I'm definitely a more analytical, systematic type of marketer. I do believe in intuition. I use it. I'm creative. I paint at home, and I've always had that part of me. But you have to marry the two. I think the best marketers can marry the two, and they synthesize the analytics and the metrics of the business with the intuition and the understanding of the persona and the psyche. And frankly, a lot of other business leaders fail at that. They cannot get their head around anything that's not in a spreadsheet or analytical. But if you're going to talk to a board, talk to a CEO, talk to a CFO, partner with other parts of the business, and persuade an entire business to execute, you have to be able to also speak in numbers as well. And too many marketers dismiss that, or they use numbers purely for storytelling instead of truth finding and then problem solving. And if you sound like a marketer too much, where everything's polished and everything's finessed, and the such, people don't trust you. So you have to get to the point.
Okay, so let's map the journey because you've been with Tipalti how long?
Almost 11 years now.
Right. So 11 years ago, it was a tiny little speck of dust, and now it's $1 billion powerhouse. So, as you went through those different stages of transition, how did the business change and evolve?
Uh, Massive. It's difficult actually to think back at the different stages, but you tend to forget until you're forced to think, which these types of podcasts are useful for that. Yeah. So when I joined, we were about 25 employees. We're now over 1,000. Most of those 25 employees were just basic engineering. There's a very small, limited, pretty much a small sales team. At that point, it was mostly in California. That small sales team, but you're talking about 5 people basically, and then the rest were engineers and product folks, most engineers. So in the beginning, I did a white space. You did your more typical things I learned at GE and into it, SWOT analysis and competitive assessment and understanding what our differentiators were, understanding the competitive landscape. And I love that kind of work. I started off thinking of myself as more of a Procter and Gamble style of marketer. So put that in place. And then you have to take it down a level further to the tactical strategies, I call them, underneath the strategic levers, and then you have to execute. And I had to reteach myself how to do that. So in the early days, you really have to be able to get your hands in there. Recruiting was a real learning for me at NetSuite or at Intuit or GE. Those particularly NetSuite in the later days, but even the earlier days, it was like you could grill people and really find, go deep in choosing your talent. In the early days of a startup, you have to really sell your business and sell the vision. And that was a learning for me after a few of my recruitment efforts. And I even had to speak with my CEO about that same observation so that both of us kind of sold the vision a little bit more. And then, of course, you still have to assess and get good talent. But the type of talent you're looking for is totally different. In the early days, they need to be, folks who want it, who have that fight, that grit, can stick their hands way down into that soil, and do everything necessary. Work with you, of course, think strategically, but tactically at the same time. And then as you get larger, there's different skill sets that are required. You have to think more at scale. You have to think more repeatability. You want to put the infrastructure, the data, the systems in place to make decisions better. As you get even larger, communication becomes more important. That actually is a place where being a marketer helps a lot because as a marketer, you should be a natural communicator, and strong at communicating both internally and externally, and repeating because it takes 5 times for people to get concepts, and to get alignment, communication becomes a much bigger part of your job. And you have to kind of focus as a business on that more to make sure the execution again happens in the right places, the right way, with the right visibility, because you can't possibly do everything yourself. As you get larger, you have to get the right talent first that you can trust and delegate to have the right oversight and visibility necessary to ensure things are going the right path. And then communication becomes very important at all levels to make sure troops are focused in the right places.
So that then brings me to two questions. One is around your operating rhythm, and the second is around middle management. So let's deal with the middle management first. In my experience, the single greatest catalyst in building a successful operation is to have a good middle management layer. Else, if you don't, then they can massively negatively impact the performance. So, how do you make sure that you're recruiting good middle managers and you're equipping them to do the right job instead of becoming jobs worths and process monkeys?
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I think both the leadership level below the leadership as well as middle management both are two of the most critical things as you keep scaling and growing. I think the first piece is be selective. It's worth having a high bar and taking several months longer to hire the right people than just filling the role because it's easier for you at the time or for the business. The pain is unfortunate, but it's worth it. Once you get the right person, the value of that leverage to the business and for freeing you up and freeing the rest of the business up and for getting their teams focused in the right places is well worth it. The other tricky piece is at different times and your maturity, that definition of those leaders and managers may change. A person may be a excellent professional, dedicated, hardworking, intelligent, strategic, good executor, good manager, good people leader, and yet they might be right for a stage when you're, I don't know, 200 employees, and when you get to 1,000, they can't do the right things that are necessary to take it to the next level. Either whether it's a strategic acumen, whether it's communication skills, whether it's alignment around the business and partnering, collaborating with people in different departments. So that definition does change, but either way, you should always have a high bar. And then you have to also make the other tricky decision along the route is when, ideally you promote from within as much as possible, but there is a point where you need to also mix in outside thinking and talent that's been at a certain level of scale before to bring in that experience. With that, my learning, particularly at Tipalti, but I've seen it at NetSuite and previous companies, it's really tricky, but you have to have a good bullshit detector. Because there are some middle managers and business leaders that came from a scaled company that were just maybe they were right place, right time, maybe maybe they're good in that business atmosphere, but they've got to fit your company DNA to some extent, and they've got to be willing to adapt their playbook to your company culture and your company business model and the such. And some folks can't do that or won't do that. Some folks also can only kind of tell a good story, and they actually can't layer it down to leading a team that's high performing, that's driven, and the such. So you do have to bring in outside talent to complement people that are promoted from within, and for everyone to kind of build off of one another. But you're going to make some mistakes along the route of doing that, and you have to be aware of it and just look for folks who talk a good game but can actually get results. It's a consistent theme on that one. It's just you're doing it. Results differs as you're at different levels of scale.
So that ties back to your earlier point about communication. So Tom Schodorf took Splunk from 35 million to 1.3 billion in 5 years, and he operated off a one-page operating rhythm. I'm curious how you ensured that you were communicating the right things to the right people in the right way at the right time, and that along the way, what lessons you learned in order to learn that rhythm.
Yeah. I'll probably admit that I don't think we have the same operating rhythm as Splunk. I'll have to go and watch that podcast to see what I can learn from that. The one page operating rhythm sounds interesting. We over time we've had to add rhythms to our business because things that we took for granted in the early days, became much more important to be overt around. So, for example, in early days, we were a little dismissive of the value of a mission and company values, and whether do you really need it on paper? It seems so formulaic and so formal, and a little phony almost. And as we got bigger, it became much more important to get those. And we did put them on paper, by the way, but there was some cynicism around it, and how important it is. But as you get bigger, things like that are absolutely critical. Other types of rhythms we've put in place on the leadership team level. We've always had a quarterly, a week long offsite, so we go and look at the business QBR. We look forward to the future. We talk about difficult topics, and that's really important, particularly because we're a pretty distributed company from a regional perspective and cultural perspective. As that's really helped over time as we built out our leadership team. We also then have multiple other avenues of communication, both those same executive meetings. We have I think it's about a 1.5 hour quarterly meeting with all the business leaders across functional to talk to them about what we discussed, some of the outtakes, some of the things we're looking into to get feedback and input. My CEO does roundtables with leaders across the business to get a touch of sentiment around the business. I do tons of one-to-ones with different people at different levels of the business, not only direct reports or even one level down, but beyond even one level down, to get sentiment of morale, issues, question marks in the business, and act on them. That has multiple roles in the business. We've created SWAT teams around key initiatives of focus that are cross-functional. Cross-functional becomes really, really important. In the early days, you can just walk down a hallway and have a conversation over coffee with someone. That's your SWAT team. In the later days, where people are more specialized by function, and they tend to get overly focused on their own departmental KPIs and just naturally, particularly with kind of COVID reinforcing certain behaviors and digital and work from home and all these things overlapping and compounding on one another, people kind of tend to stay in their little silo. And you have to break those silos because the business doesn't work when it's just KPIs, departmental KPIs and silos. And so you have to create these SWAT groups and other types of functions that force people to talk with one another and engage and solve problems as a team, not as separate units.
So when the growth looked great on the surface, how do you detect the rot under the floorboards?
Some of it's actually talking with people around the business. Of course, if you have the right metric systems, you should always have early indicators in there. I'm a big proponent of balanced scorecard as a metric system. I do not like having only one goal because I think that people tend to game a goal and a system. And while it seems more simple, and maybe an MBA school would say focus on one metric for simplicity purposes or other purposes. I think the same comment with intuition and the need to balance analytics with intuition and maybe more qualitative forms of data. A balanced scorecard really rounds out your insights for the business. And any good balanced scorecard should include early indicators as well of trouble signs. The other thing is sometimes early indicators aren't going to catch that. And so if you're listening to people, listening to customers, listening to employees who you trust within the business, and putting together patterns and trends you hear from those various conversations, you'll find early indicators that either maybe had a missing early indicator and you're not measuring something, or maybe your measurement system's too focused. Let's say, for example, your measurement system is too focused on conversion rates and ACV, but you're not looking at cancellation rates, onboarding rates, customer expansion rates, which tells you a different set. Maybe you don't have NPS being measured or by product line and such like that. And you can make completely wrong decisions for your business, short and long term, if you're only focusing on certain metrics. And so if you have a well-rounded balanced scorecard, if you're listening to input from other people or listening to input from customers from cabs or other forums like an online community, for example, or you're listening to internal employees and the challenges they're having, you'll start finding these types of things. But a lot of it's about listening. Some of that's data, but it's not only data.
So, what are the questions you wish investors would ask you more often, but they rarely do?
That's an interesting question. I think investors tend to stay at a space level a little bit more. And if they got a level deeper in terms of target market segments that you focus on, where your differentiators are, how you differentiate from other folks in the space, because whether they're in the space now or they'll be in the space in the future as the market gets hotter, you'll need to know that. So the identity of the company where you distinguish yourself is still the heart of a business, and how you kind of build those moats and widen those moats around those differentiators is really critical. And I think investors tend to gloss over that a little bit and look at, again, core metrics for the business, which do tell that story if you extrapolate it, but they're not getting the why sometimes. So
They need a balanced scorecard.
yeah, exactly.
So, which are the assumptions about scaling that you found to be dangerously wrong when you crossed the 100 million ARR mark?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think one of the assumptions, I alluded to it before, one of the assumptions is that that you have to upgrade your talent to get people to take you to the right place. And I think that's a right assumption, but if it's executed incorrectly, and you end up bringing in a lot of people who create this kind of very heavy, top-loaded business, and folks that don't go further down into the company, and that's where the strategy falls apart when you don't go further, or you don't adapt based on learnings. So I think it's the right assumption that you have to upgrade talent for the different levels and have people that can scale. But the execution of that is really, really critical of finding the right types of people that fit your business, that are willing to adapt to your business, and that can get low enough in the company to do the right things to get results. It can hurt your DNA if you get that wrong. So it's a critical process to go through. But just assuming that getting a bunch of, I don't know, Oxford and Stanford graduates in your company who've done some great things at great companies will be a panacea for all issues is wrong. You're going to have to fire half those people. You'll probably get them wrong. And I've seen that at NetSuite multiple times and such like that. If they can't get the results for your business, then they're not fit. So you have to constantly you can't assume that that's a good enough decision making. You have to then watch it and adapt and refine it for your business over time. Then that definition is going to change 6 months later, a year later as you keep growing, which is the real challenge. Every 6 months, you're basically a new type of leader, or have to be, and you have to decide if you can step up to the plate or not.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because one of the things that I see happen repeatedly is this deal momentum theater and systemic dysfunction that occurs where one side of the business, whether it be sales or finance, is predominant, and there's pressure and to bring home prey to hit certain metrics. And without that holistic approach, where you see the business as an organism, then what tends to happen is we overemphasize one part or another.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
with deal momentum theater, what you get is everyone's talking about the big wins, but then real cash or retention lags behind, loyalty gets harmed.
Totally.
So how do you protect against that?
Yeah, it kind of goes back actually to that balanced scorecard approach. And I'll admit, like at times in this business and previous business, I've totally seen that theater you're talking about in one part of the business being too heavily guiding the whole business too heavily. And I totally agree with at the end of the day, actually, even more so, I'd argue with the AI landscape and the way social media works these days and the news, the media and the such like that. It's almost more important that you run the business in a healthy, holistic way. Both there's an investor sentiment, and they want to invest in companies that are profitable and have better margins and all good, better payback and such. So it's very different from that perspective. But also the companies who do it best have customers advocating for your business. And so if you're too heavy on upfront growth and new business growth, um, then you may run into exactly the problem you're alluding to of, you don't get customers live or they're unhappy and they spread bad word of mouth to the business and the such like that. A much more healthy, profitable way to run the business is actually to have happy customers. Now, it may not always get the momentum you want. So there's a balancing act. And it's, if it's uncomfortable for everyone, that's probably, you've got the right answer. If everyone's a little unhappy, then you probably have found the right settling point, because you do have to naturally push the business beyond its comfort zone and have it stretching and testing new things all the time. But you want to stretch it so far that it backfires on your customer, who are the heart of your business ultimately. That's certainly how it should be thought of. Um, because that's the best way to grow a company profitably is have happy customers, have them advocating for you. Whether you can measure it or not doesn't matter, but you can measure it in things like NPS and other early indicators of NPS. Um,
So I'll come to MPS in a minute, but when did the focus shift from acquiring and winning new customers to protecting and retaining customers and expanding customers?
when did Sapalti shift?
Yeah.
I'd say in the early days, we were naturally that way. We've always had excellent retention. It was one of the reasons I joined the company, and we've maintained that throughout our history. But in the early days, everyone was focused as a business. We're in small offices. Everyone's talking with one another as a team, and so and our CO and down, we're always very focused on customer success. So that's much easier. When you're larger, you've got departmental KPIs, which of course you need to run a business. Everyone's got to have goals and accountability and the such like that. But people can game goals, and the larger you get, the more they do, either by at individual, at manager levels, departmental levels, leadership levels, and the such. And sometimes they're not even gaming it; they're just focused on that goal, and they don't realize that they might be doing something that damages another part of the business. Our retention always stayed high, but we did see at some points we started seeing other parts of the business, like things like NPS not being as strong as it was before, and the such like that. And so that was kind of an early indicator. And then you talked about that a business is a organism just a few minutes ago. And if you're listening to people, you start sensing, oh, this department's frustrated because of this thing. This department's frustrated in this thing. You start looking into them, you start identifying new metrics. And, again, back to the balanced scorecard, and that starts identifying, oh, this product area has a higher error rate, or this type of feedback, we're starting to see some lag in certain performance indicators. Or these departments are saying, well, we can't get certain things down the line as well. And so you start listening to that and you start realizing that you have to make some changes. Things that worked when you could just talk over a cup of coffee don't work when you have multiple departments and multiple regions across multiple parts of the world and such like that, and you're at scale. And so that's where you have to put more institutional focus. So we created customer values. We made sure customer centricity was part of the values that I alluded to earlier that were printed and put in all the offices and the walls, all that good stuff. We created customer experience committees. We had both buyer journey committees and customer journey committees separated because they think differently, the groups of the buyer journey and the customer journey, but both had changes they had to make. But you have to basically break those departmental KPIs and get back to trying to almost synthesize that small business mentality and atmosphere, both from a mentality perspective of we're going toward this mission and we have to play as one team, and then secondly, of course, on execution toward that mission.
Excellent. Okay. So which process or behavior do you most regret institutionalizing too late?
Hmm. Probably you alluded to it, but I think probably for a period of time we are too focused on new business conversion and new business ACV, at the expense of looking at the entire life cycle, holistically. I think that would probably be one regret. I think the other piece is on more of the product side. it's a really tricky. All these things are tricky balances, and you can't go too extreme one way or the other. It's all about balance in some ways at the end of the day. But on the other side, there's your product vision and where you want to be in the future, and what you need to be successful now. And if you lean too far on the product vision, sometimes you don't round out those solutions that are needed that your customers want to use to get the most value out of that. At the same time, if you only look too tactical and only listen to customer feedback or maybe field feedback on things that'll improve conversion or expand TAM, you don't invest in the future and your vision. I'm assuming you have a vision. If you don't have a product vision or a company vision, that's a whole different set of problems. But the balancing act and the trade-offs, and we made errors both sides. Sometimes investing too far in the vision, sometimes investing too far in here and now, or maybe sometimes investing too far in new business growth versus the customer, or vice versa, maybe, where then you don't invest in your strategy or in your vision enough or kind of differentiators and such. So it's a constant tricky balance. We've created an ROI calculation over time on the product side that kind of tries to objectify it, and that's helpful. But again, that can be gamed as well. And it can be too biased towards new business or too biased towards customer. And so you constantly have to refine it based on listening to the market, listening to investor sentiment, looking at the competition. At the end of the day, you have to constantly adapt practically everything in the business and move people along with it so they're not freaking out with all the change.
So how do you balance investor pressure for EBIT, EBIT lift with the SaaS realities that demand continued reinvestment?
Yeah. Yeah, it's also a tricky balance. I will say that there's that some metrics, if you focus on certain metrics too myopically, and try and gain them almost, that'll backfire on you eventually. Maybe in the short term, you can pump up certain metrics, but if you're doing it in a way that's at the expense of your strategy or at the expense of your position in the marketplace or at the expense of the customer or at the expense of other things, then you've gone too far. I will say that certain metrics, like this is a very difficult thing to do, but LTV to CAC, for example, and I'm a big proponent. One of the things you asked the question of what we didn't do earlier. I wish we'd have done long-term value calculations earlier in our that balance, that everything you just talked about a little earlier about that holistic organism of the business. A smart long-term value model does balance your business because it ensures your thing long term. And if you balance that along with LTV to CAC, and you look at that not only overall in the business but by segment, within the business, by channel, by business segment, by target market profile, that actually does put a really nice filter on the business and brings things into scale, and it balances short and long term for the business. It makes you look more holistically across the whole company. It's difficult to do a proper LTV calculation and LTV to CAC. So some companies do it, but I think or don't do it. But I wish we would have done it earlier. I think it would have told us things earlier and helped us make better decisions even earlier. But the fact we have that now is really guiding our business in terms of where we're investing more and less, and it guides it in a healthy way. And it helps you also control the investors to some degree in terms of the story you can tell them and why you're investing in which place, because they do get that it's a long slog. But if you let them just focus on certain metrics that are trend of the day without balancing it, then you can either go down the the wrong path if you go that route, or you can't bring your investors along with you, which is another problem.
Well, this is really interesting because over the last few months, I've been working on trying to come up with an alternative to NPS because so many organizations see it as the North Star for customer health. But saying, would you recommend me? Odds are you're going to get a lot of people saying yes when they probably won't. And they may even churn despite having a high NPS score 6 months later. So how useful is NPS in managing real growth risk? And do you think that we need a more honest measure? The score that I've come up with is net value score that ties customer outcomes directly to revenue retention and margin.
So I'll say that I'm an advocate for NPS score. We did not always in the early days. Again, you don't have to measure it that much. You can feel it. But as we grew, I think NPS was actually, it was one, I didn't mention that when I talked about the customer experience piece, but NPS was a step we took earlier. And that was a positive step toward then building out a more customer centric culture for the business as we scaled. So I believe in NPS. I actually don't think it's an easy metric to game. I think, I'm surprised you're British. I don't think British people will necessarily give a positive NPS if they don't feel like it, and maybe they'll even get more negative NPS scores than other folks because it's just a bit of a naturally more cynical culture potentially and more direct, which is a good thing. But I've even seen in other regions, I don't NPS is not an easy metric to game in my opinion. And it's a pretty humbling metric because a lot of people also give you six and sevens. They'll be like, yeah, you're good. I like you, but I'm not, going to go up to a nine and 10 and the such. Um, so I think MPS has been a very positive improvement in the business. We've actually expanded the scope of MPS over time as we've gone deeper and deeper. Now we have it on every product line, and it does tell us things. I think the problem with MPS is that it's hard to attach to the business results. So I like what you're proposing from a business outcome perspective. And it's also a hard thing to convey to investors. Investors don't seem to give a shit about MPS. And there's a lot of other execs and business people that are cynical about whether MPS really matters. I think there's enough data that indicates it does matter as part of a balanced scorecard, along with other metrics, CSATs across the touch points, ramp, implementation, revenue realization, CAC, payback, LTV, LTV to CAC, conversion rate, ACV, all these things. As part of the pie, it makes a lot of sense. But it's not some people are cynical about MPS because it's hard to attach to real results. And it's a long-term measure. It's not an early indicator for sure, as well. So you have to have metrics before it. So
Well,
that's my take.
therein I think lies the issue, which I'd be curious to maybe discuss another time. But MPS tells you how someone feels today. What I'm trying to work out is how do you tell whether the relationship is actually worth more tomorrow? And
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
we work? How do we establish that in a meaningful and predictable way that the investors can get behind as well?
Yeah. 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 I agree. It doesn't show that. And ultimately at the end of the day, there's two pieces. Like, how are you different than your market, than other competitors in your market in a way that makes you more sticky? Um, and then do people overtly feel the benefit of that differentiation, that stickiness? Are they just sticking with you because it's difficult to change and difficult to move to someone else, and maybe you are differentiated? Or is it actually, you know, a bit of a wow experience where you're differentiated and people are like, wow, like on a regular basis, they're impressed by you and how you do things. And as you innovate, you compound those wows and make them stronger. I think that second part is the real secret sauce of some of the most successful companies on earth.
Well, I think you've touched on something that's really close to my heart, which is what's the difference between renewal, repeat, and loyalty?
Definitely. And they're totally different things.
Yeah.
They really are. I mean, if you can get loyalty, the first two start taking care of themselves. That's a lot harder to do than to say. But that's what you should be aspiring toward the business. And we talked about communication, but that's the type of thing you need to put out as a North Star to the business. By the way, North Star is another one I think is really important as you grow to advocate for, which is different than goals and objectives. But people need a vision, and some people turn their brains off when it gets to metrics, unlike investors or C-suite. But that North Star is really important for the employee base, so that they have something they can aspire toward and relate to and keep their KPIs in check and sort of in a way.
Investors tend to pay for gross recurring revenue, net recurring revenue, EBITDA, exit multiples. But how do we show the link between customer behavior and cash flow?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question and a difficult one. I mean, I think if you um you have to correlate the outcomes of customer expansion, retention, expansion. It's very difficult to identify word of mouth, but at minimum, retention and expansion uh, with their behaviors. So, like data science, we built a data team out, which again is an important thing to do as you get larger. And the power of a good data team, particularly with AI in place nowadays, is it almost is to, if you've got the right team in place and they can help your company identify insights like that on, oh, we see the LTV to CAC or the expansion rate or the ramp rate, all these things are 3x better when you have them using this product or this combination of products, or they've used this feature or the such, or some other pattern, a segmentation pattern based on, I don't know, airspace, what ERP they're using, what employee band are they, what characteristics they have. Those types of insights are so powerful. So you can focus the business and the investment of the business in the right places. And that often then translates to better LTV to CAC and better payback and such like that. But it's data mining really is what you need to identify the correlation patterns.
You said that mapping word of mouth is hard. One of the things that I've spent the last 25 years really focused on is how do we systematize and make referrals part of the DNA of the entire organization and the customer base and the partner base. And
Yeah,
I'm really curious.
the network effect.
Well, it strikes me that so many organizations are fixated on new logos, new business, and they forget the stuff that really matters. Customers who keep buying and will not go anywhere else because they love the experience.
Yeah.
It's like the battle between Coke and Pepsi. Trying to
Yeah.
get someone to. I was coaching someone this morning, and we were using that as an example. And I asked, if you go into a restaurant and you ask for Pepsi, and they say, "Oh, we only have Coke," what do you do? I says, "Well, I'll have it reluctantly."
Mhm.
And they don't want it, but they'll have it because they want a cola. Um,
Yeah.
but I think we've got to start getting into a place where referrals is not something that happens by accident. It's
Yeah.
systematized. It's part of every conversation. And I look at new business teams and they flog themselves to death, dialing for dollars, and the win rates are painfully low. Whereas, if you 1 in 23 win rate, if you're getting referred without training, you get a roughly 1 in 6 win rate, but they spend 2.5 times more on the initial order. They repeat order 3 times as frequently, and they refer 4 times as often. Now,
Yeah.
why is it that so few go-to-market leadership are fixated on and obsessed with turning referrals into an engine?
Yeah. I think the number one part is it's hard to do that, and I think there's not a
So what?
well built out systematic way to do it. Um, but I think the other challenge there is there's new business sales teams, and most of the leaders of these sales teams are new business folks. And we've had a big effort the last 2 years. We call it Go to Base, but it's basically customer expansion. And when you start really looking at how to do that, you benchmark, which we've done a ton of benchmarking across, against larger companies than us in similar spaces or tangential spaces. But I was stunned when I took that project on myself, and I was stunned when I did all the benchmarking and kind of synthesized it all and read through it, how immature go-to-base and customer expansion motions are generally. And it's this departmental thing. You got the sales group and the marketing group. Most of them are pretty much new business focused. And you've got a customer operations focused group, which is very much get people live, give them customer success, which also has sometimes mixed goals. It's also a relatively new function in business maturity. And the groups are doing their own things with their own KPIs again and not playing together. And you have to kind of start looking at it end to end and almost structure your business to a degree to bring it all together for people to start communicating. And the logic of if you can get a referral machine going, which starts, you can't get a referral machine going if you don't have happy customers. You can't get a referral machine going if you don't have implemented customers. You can't get a referral engine going if you don't have a infrastructure to support your customers. And then to deliver that experience, both product and the support system, and the interaction of those two. But you have to kind of organize your business in a way that can pull all things together. And then ideally have the right metrics so you can determine where to focus on and where not to get the right, to focus the business on the right areas of the business where you get those outcomes.
I'm conscious we've only got a couple of minutes left. For the last 18 years, I think one of the big problems is that money's been cheap. And
Yeah.
certainly within tech, it didn't really matter if you made a profit. And in February 2023, the conditions changed. And the net result of that is that we've got a bunch of people who grew up in an environment where basically you didn't have to make a profit. You just had to drag in new logos no matter the cost.
Yeah.
And they haven't adapted. And I
Yeah.
think the people who are in charge of sales and go-to-market functions are the wrong people. They're new business and they're cold new business. And I think the people who should be running go-to-market are customer success and marketing and channel. They're the ones who are closest to the real shitty end of the stick. And I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
I agree on everything you said from a environmental perspective, from a investor perspective. And I think the ones who don't adapt to that are going to die because they just won't be profitable enough and their metrics will be bad. So I think over time it'll clean the system out. I think some people are adapting who were maybe more new business. It's not rocket science to learn this, but you have to change your mentality, and what you measure and how you measure. Some people won't be able to adapt, and they'll get replaced in due time. But I think executive teams, sales leadership, marketing leadership, all customer operations. I do agree the CSM function, the customer success function, is going to become more important in your account management function, which is, I was surprised when I did that benchmarking, both customer success and account management. They're like afterthoughts. And the channel groups, including marketing, barely support them. Alliances oftentimes don't support them. There has to be a whole change in the mentality of both the executive team and the go-to-market, go-to-base functions in terms of the balance struck between the two. And it's actually the key to LTV to CAC, and it's the key to profitability, and it's key to good, healthy business metrics that are sustainable. So it's a tough adaptation for everyone, to make, but it's a necessity, and I think it's the new world. And I think AI, by the way, AI and all this media stuff, including my wonderful president, it decreases trust in everything. And so companies like who build around trust and have trust within their customer base and trust within their partner base are the ones that will fly. And there's a limit to how much you can synthesize trust. You have to really earn it and build a company that engenders it.
Well, I could kiss you for that because what I've spent the last 5 years doing is turning trust into an operating system. And I've now worked out how to measure it as a hard metric. And that's really fascinating because when you see how trust works through an organization and through the buyer's journey, it can be such a powerful multiplier. And so few organizations see trust as anything other than this soft, fluffy metric. It's insane because if you turn trust into the operating system, into infrastructure, and you make it the North Star, then everybody in the organization is working towards common purpose.
Oh, and employees get motivated by that. They want to do good things, generally speaking, and they want to feel like what they're investing their time in. Not everyone's going to be rich off the back of their business. Some people just want a good lifestyle but feel good about the work they do. And if they feel like they're making an impact to customers they serve and to the companies they serve and helping them, improve their life, people get engaged by that. And you want to engage employees who are loyal and as well. So it's motivating.
We've come to time. Before we go, what's your best mistake?
My best mistake is being naive and taking chances, going into gray spaces that sometimes may be unpopular. Um, doesn't always work out, but you always learn. But also, I definitely don't think I would have had had the experience I've had if I didn't make those mistakes.
Rob Israch, thank you.
Cool. It's been good, Marcus. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
So this is Marcus Kauke signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you found this useful, then please like, comment, share, and please pass this on to somebody who is going through rapid growth, who is a leader and is facing some of the ups and downs. In fact, Rob, how can people get a hold of you if you want people to get a hold of you?
I think I'm the only israch on LinkedIn, one of very, very few. So look me up on LinkedIn, connect with me. And I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn and email.
Excellent. So that's me wrapping up. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.